So let's now, at this last video of this CM2, so continue to address the issue of CSR. So we saw in the previous video the question of stakeholders and stakeholder salience, and now let's look directly at the issue of CSR and how companies can engage in CSR, but from this perspective of ethics. Now, CSR is also known as socially responsible business conduct, corporate citizenship, corporate responsibility, corporate sustainability. So you have several titles for corporate social responsibility. Uh, um, there is also, yes, this idea of sustainability, although much that can be said in terms of the difference between CSR and sustainability, because corporate social responsibility is not exactly the same thing as sustainability, but we'll leave it to another occasion to discuss that. I will show you now different definitions of CSR. The definitions, as I already told you, are important insofar they help you to structure your mind. So you are not supposed to write these definitions uh, um, in the exam. You are not supposed to know the definitions by heart, but you are supposed to understand the definitions and to use them as a mental framework to understand the situation. It's a little bit like the theories of ethics, etc. So they are tools for you to understand what is around you. So, but CSR was defined as how companies manage business processes to produce an overall positive impact on society, or doing business while respecting ethical values, respect for people, the communities, and the environment. The ongoing commitment of business to behave ethically and contribute to sustainable economic development while contributing to the quality of life of the workforce, the families, the local communities, and societies. Also, we're talking here about stakeholders, clearly. Committing to improving community well-being through discretionary business practices and contributions of corporate resources. That's more an American perspective of CSR, more like these discretionary or philanthropic activities. It's more American than European. The previous one is more European than American. Because it refers more to the stakeholders, to the different stakeholders, although it raises questions again about what is the ethical behavior, and the more interesting thing is sustainable economic development. What do we mean by sustainable economic development? Because if we are talking about economic development, what do we mean? Are we talking about strong or weak sustainability? Are we talking about a weak sustainability, meaning that we think that the anthropo systems can compensate the advantage for the anthropo systems can compensate the disadvantages or the cost of the natural systems, which is where we live now? Okay, so that we say, okay, we will destroy the river, but we create jobs. Or always talking about strong sustainability, in which we say, no, we have to look to the system as a whole, and we have to allow, so there is no compensation possible. Resources must be allowed to renovate before we can use them again. And so there are no transfers possible between anthropo and economic or natural systems. Okay, but when we talk about sustainable economic development, we also have to define what do we mean about development. Are we talking about economic growth? And I can tell you that 99% of the times, well, this is not very exact, but most of the times when people talk about economic development, they are thinking about economic growth. And then what do we mean about economic growth? Are we thinking about that idea of always growing and using more resources? Or are we talking about economic development in the sense of human development or overall development that can involve also spiritual development, for instance, or other things that are not material? Because if we talk about sustainable economic development in the sense of growth, then this is kind of an oxymoron. You cannot talk about sustainable and then growth. But if you are talking about development as is human development, spiritual development, or whatever, then it's possible to equate these. But you see, the importance also of definitions is that we can discuss this degree of detail. Are we talking about economic development as growth or as evolution, positive evolution? Now, other definitions: voluntary actions that companies can take beyond compliance with minimal legal requirements to meet both their own competitive interests and those of the society as a whole. This is very Anglo-Saxonic. The contribution of companies to the objectives of sustainable development. This is essentially the way in which companies take account of their economic, social, and environmental impacts in the way they operate, maximizing the benefits and minimizing the detriments. So this is a very SDGs approach, kind of United Nations approach. And then we have the voluntary integration by companies of social and environmental concerns into their business operations and stakeholder relationships. A company that practices CSR will therefore seek to have a positive impact on society while being economically viable. So this is a more balanced definition that puts all stakeholders, but also economic value in the equation. Now, but what is common to all these definitions is that all talk about economic, social, and environmental accountability. So we have to find a balance between these three forces. Most of them promote human rights, democracy, community participation, sustainable development. Although here we have to be a little bit, and it's clear those definitions that I gave you are clearly Western biased. Okay, if you explore some definitions of sustainable development or of CSR from a Chinese perspective, for instance, it's completely different. They are looking, when they are talking about sustainable development, they are talking about equilibrium with nature. They're talking about balance with natural systems and not democracy or these social aspects. They are looking, when they talk about CSR, they are looking at nature fundamentally. Well, in a way, contribution to sustainable economic development, and definitely going beyond what the law requires of them, and the responsibility to contribute to a better society and a cleaner environment. But again, although those definitions have this in common, but there are different perspectives depending on where from the world you look. So, for instance, if you look more from Africa, the definitions of CSR are fundamentally social, about poverty, about famine, about access to water. If we're talking in Asia, in China, they are talking more about respect for the environment, climate change, and all those dangers coming from climate change. If we are talking in Europe, we are talking more from this balance between the three forces. Okay, and we try to reach a balance between the three. If we go to the United States or more the Anglo-Saxonic world, there is a stronger focus on economic factors and then the other two. And potentially more the social and only then the environmental. So you see that this differs from the type of location that you are looking from. One thing that is fundamental, please, organizations do not do corporate social responsibility. Individuals do not do honesty. When you say I am doing honesty, what does that mean? So companies don't do responsibility. Companies are socially responsible. And whenever you listen to someone saying, well, we are doing a lot in corporate social responsibility, that's greenwashing. That's greenwashing. That's a way of disguising what they are doing. That's a self-reflective attitude of someone that is very well aware of what they are doing, but they are not actually doing it for the purpose that it should be done. So they are not actually being socially responsible. They are acting as if they are socially responsible. This is very, pay attention to the discourse of companies. And you will notice that companies that say we are investing in corporate social responsibility, they're not doing that as much as being, or they are not being as much as responsible. Okay. Now, why is this important? Why is CSR important? Well, at the company level, and being very pragmatic, being responsible is good for reputation, because you see, the opposite of being responsible is being irresponsible. Of course that there is a positive side to this on reputation, brand image, but of course in risk management, because if a company is responsible, it will incur in more risks. Because if a company is irresponsible, for instance, it will not cater for the environment, and then will probably be punished by penalties imposed by the government and local authorities. So, of course, that for risk management, being responsible reduces risk because we can anticipate tendencies and we are not exposing companies to social risks, to environmental risks, and to economic risks. It's also good because it gives some kind of license to operate, kind of legitimacy, as we discussed in the previous video. So this gives legitimacy to companies because people say, okay, well, yes, you are offering us, so we are allowing you to be in society and operating, but you are behaving well. And then for strategic asset management also, of course. A company that is responsible allocates resources there where it is more necessary, is anticipating risk. So this is very connected with risk management. It's as anticipating risk, is investing in assets that will be necessary in the future in case of change. But of course that this is important at the marketing and sales level for brand positioning. Although here I have to resist the temptation of saying we are doing CSR. It's we are responsible, therefore, okay, it will, of course, given today's society, increase sales and market share, will help business development, will help customer retention. People of your generation, you can't stand it anymore. These companies that are always polluting or not being responsible. You prefer buying elsewhere. You prefer buying vintage than Zara. And why? Because vintage is Zara, a second opportunity to Zara. And because you know, some of you, of course, not everyone, you know that Zara or H&M or all those companies, they are H&M, they are polluting. And so you go to other companies. Responsible firms tend to attract better people. Who would like to work for a corrupt company? Who would like to work for a company that people know that they don't respect human rights, or that they pay low salaries and they don't pay taxes, or that they are engaged in practices of corruption? So of course that these attracts good people and also retains good people. And the opposite is true. When a company has problems with responsibility, is not socially responsible, the first people to leave are the best ones. And of course, that the best ones will not want to work. Now, of course, that always linked. So if you retain people, if you avoid risk, if you increase your sales, then the value of your shares increase. Uh, your access to markets and capital is better, it's facilitated. You reduce costs. You are uh, less vulnerable to regulatory oversight. You can even participate. BP before 2012 was doing that. BP was participating in creating laws for oversight of oil companies. First, and then we discovered that the guy that was at the helm of BP in 2012, unfortunately, um, and contrary to the previous one, he was very keen in doing CSR and not being responsible. At an operational level, also, is uh, very important, because the quality of products and services will increase, productivity is likely to increase, safety and accountability is likely to increase, efficiency is likely to increase, innovation is likely to increase. Because you see, when people say, oh no, why are we investing in new renewable energies? Oh, these left wing guys that they don't want to, so let's drill, baby, drill. Lots of innovations and money to be made out of the clean energies. Lots of innovations and money to be made out of corporate social responsibility. Of course, that it's not the established power, it's not the established companies that will do that, but the mavericks, the innovators, the entrepreneurs can do that. And so when you have the drill, baby, drill, is nothing more, that has nothing to do with the macho politics, or the we are stronger than you are. No, this is just the discourse of the an era that cannot adapt, of a status quo that is struggling to change, of a group of companies that they don't want to lose their privileges. Has nothing to do with maintaining or not capitalism, has nothing to do with right or left wing, nothing. It has all to do with the status quo and protecting companies that cannot change and are difficult to change. If you want, these protectionist activities, these attitudes of drill, baby, drill, are more anti-capitalistic than otherwise, because they are not allowing the free flow of markets. They are not allowing innovation. They are not allowing what Schumpeter said, the creative destruction. They are preventing the creative destruction of capitalism by securing some old order just to protect their interests. So you see that this is not the left and right. You can have argument from the left and the right. And the worst thing that you can do is that you don't enter this dialogue, you don't enter this discussion, you avoid these type of discussions because you are convinced this is a left-wing discussion, and which is not a left-wing discussion, no right-wing. This is a discussion about our planet, about the attitude to have in the world by companies. It's an attitude if we want to survive as a society. We have, if we want to keep what is there to keep, then we should adapt. We should change. Um, what are the different dimensions of CSR? So when we are talking about CSR, what are we talking about? We are talking about ethics, values, business principles. We are talking about corporate governance. We are talking about sustainability and sustainable development, accountability, transparency, commitment to socio-economic development, environmental concerns, human rights, workers' rights and welfare, relationships with markets. Again, different people look at these with different from different perspectives, and some geographies can say that, well, they are mostly concerned about the environment, others mostly about human rights, others mostly about ethics. But these are, if you want, all the dimensions of CSR. Um, Now, what types of CSR exist, if you want? What are the different um, approaches to CSR? You have ethical CSR, and this means that it addresses uh, does it, if you want, in a deontological way. It's a CSR that is based on the duty, is based on it should be like this, is based on the interest of the community over the interest of the individual, is based on the belief that we should act like this. So if you want, is the equivalent to the Kantian perspective of the ethics of duty. Then you have altruistic CSR. This is very American, if you want, very Anglo-Saxonic. Um, the altruistic CSR is the CSR that looks at outside at the common good and goes sometimes even further at the expense of business. So they put corporate social responsibility on top of the interests of the company, and sometimes they can question or harm even the company. There's an interesting story of a company that went bankrupt because of the all the philanthropic engagements that it had. Of course, that this is not CSR. This is not being responsible, because when you go beyond what you can, this is not being responsible. Okay? But okay, let's take this with a pint of a small portion of salt, uh, moderately, okay, and accept it as CSR. And then you have strategic CSR. Strategic CSR, if you want, is the most common form of CSR, where companies will use it as part of their strategy, and will look at issues, looking at all stakeholders, including shareholders, and in the interests of the community of the company, without creating or harming the other stakeholders. So strategic CSR is when companies are responsible because they want really to be sustainable. To be sustainable in the sense that to endure into time, to persist into time. And so in order to do that, they are responsible. And they take care of the different stakeholders. Now, strategic CSR is, and with this I finish this last video, it's very highly linked to this triple bottom line approach. And the triple bottom line is based on this idea that formerly the environment was seen as an issue of governments. The social aspects was seen as an issue of governments and individuals through philanthropy. and the business of business was business, economic and financial aspects. Okay, so we have to be productive, we have to have a profit. The number one obligation of a firm is to have profit. So this is the neoliberal approach. Now, the triple bottom line, what says, and the strategic CSR, what says is, well, probably it's not exactly like this. Probably companies are responsible for the environment. Companies are also responsible for social aspects, and companies are responsible for economic and financial aspects. So a company, to be successful, should look at all its stakeholders and cater for the environment, cater for social aspects, and cater for economic and financial aspects. Good governance is protecting the interests of the shareholders, but also protecting the interests of the other stakeholders through social concerns, through environmental concerns, and of course through economic and financial concerns. And so, if you want, so a responsible company is a company that will take care or look at its stakeholders and balance its decisions according to the needs of the different stakeholders. And with these is, in a way, maximizing, but not just maximizing profits without just taking into account the cost of capital and labor, the very traditional approach to the firm, but taking also in condition all the other limitations for the profit maximization, the environment, the social aspects. So internalizing what economists like to call the externalizations or the externalities. So the externalities are costs that so far were not paid by any company. So what social costs? We pollute a river, it's an externality, meaning that someone will pay for it. And now the tendency and the next steps will be, no, you pollute the river, you have to incorporate that cost in the price of your products, so that the real price of your products will reflect the real cost of your products, not just labor and capital, but also the ecological cost and also the social cost of. So if you want, we are still maximizing profit, but it's a profit maximization or a function that takes into account much more factors, the factors coming from the different stakeholders. Okay, good. So with these, we finish the CM2. So you have all the theoretical background necessary to address TD3 in November and TD4 in December, and also the exam. Now you have all the fundamentals to understand the ethical challenges of a company and to understand how ethics should shape the responsibility of a company, and what are the options open to companies and to individuals and to societies to behave ethically and in a more to contribute to a more harmonious society. Okay, so once again, I recommend that you watch all the 8 videos, 7+1 videos, and attend classes, and don't hesitate to ask me if you have any question during the next 2 TDs. Okay, looking forward to see you next time. Bye. Thank you for watching. Bye.